morning and welcome to Rising on this fateful Wednesday, perhaps. I'm joined again by Max Burns. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It is a busy, busy day, so let's dive in.
Yes, the end is nigh, perhaps. The floodgates opening, Democrats publicly turning on President Joe Biden. 5 days after his debate, Texas Representative Lloyd Doggett has now become the first Democrat to call for Biden to step aside. Doggett said, quote, "Too much is at stake to risk a Trump victory. I am hopeful that he, Biden, will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw. Respectfully, I call on him to do so." MSNBC analyst and former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro followed suit, saying, quote, "Defeating Donald Trump is too important for Democrats to do nothing. With the understanding that the stakes are so high, President Biden should make the difficult decision to withdraw from the race." Castro added in a separate tweet that, quote, "President Biden should fulfill his promise to be a bridge to the next generation of leadership and allow a stronger Democratic candidate to prevent a disastrous second Trump term."
Other Democrats have yet to go that far, but alarm bells are still ringing over on Capitol Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told MSNBC, quote, "It's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?" Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse expressed similar concerns. Let's watch.
You obviously are in touch with your colleagues and many of those folks. What are the conversations like, to the extent you're willing to characterize them right now?
Well, I think people want to make sure that this is a campaign that's ready to go and win, that the president and his team are being candid with us about his condition, that this was a real anomaly and not just the way he is these days, and that, they've got a plan to win.
And here's freshman Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez.
The truth, I think, is that Biden is going to lose to Trump. I know that's difficult, but I think the damage has been done by that debate.
And it gets worse. Democratic Congressman Jared Golden similarly wrote an op-ed for the Bangor Daily News titled, quote, "Donald Trump is going to win the election and democracy will be just fine." Even for former President Barack Obama, he's now privately expressing to allies, quote, "Biden's already tough path to re-election grew more challenging after his shaky debate performance on Thursday." That's according to new reporting from the Washington Post. The Post also reported that Senator Joe Manchin had planned to break with Biden on Sunday, but was dissuaded from doing that by senior Democrats. And take a listen to what CNN is now reporting.
But other party leaders we talked to are already floating the idea of opening it up to all contenders, having, let's call it a 5-week speed dating primary, maybe having debates between now and the convention, and then leaving it up to the convention. Their number one concern, who can beat Donald Trump, Anderson?
So as we said, the dam is breaking. Democrats, including prominent Democrat Julian Castro, now saying that he should step aside. I think we're expecting to see more of that in the coming days. We're going into this kind of holiday-ish weekend stretch where I know a lot of people in the political media world are at this point expecting him to drop out. I still think that's going to be a pretty tall order because Joe Biden himself has to be willing to do it. He has to want to step aside, and we're seeing no indication. He is, in a bunker with his family, all encouraging him to fight to the last man, Hunter Biden, Jill Biden. And so I'm hesitant to say that it's going to be anything other than that, but certainly the pressure is mounting. You were just telling me before we started filming that you've been talking to some Democrats on the Hill. What are they telling you?
Yeah, it is remarkable how much the conversation has shifted. I was on the Hill this morning talking to a variety of Democrats, not just raging lefties, who've described the White House as being very standoffish about this, not communicative. They expressed, one said that the excuses that have sort of spiraled about Biden's performance are now verging on what they called paranoia. And there's reason to believe that. I mean, we've seen now that they've claimed Biden had a cold, that he was tired from a foreign trip that he arrived home from 12 days before the debate. And there's a growing understanding here that the White House is not doing enough, that Biden thinking he can stand above this and wait for tempers to cool is a misreading of the situation, and that if he doesn't start to mollify these Democrats, events could start moving without him.
Yeah, I mean, just tactically, if he was sick and tired, going through with this debate was a horrible idea. They should have said he has COVID and we got to do it next week or something. I mean, that would have been less damaging, clearly, than what actually took place. I think the dam breaking phenomenon has been exacerbated. The dam is breaking harder because of how hidden it was from the public, or how stigmatized you were for asking questions about his health, his age, his mental acuity. You know, the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, and so many others, you know, were slamming it in the 10 days before the debate, slamming the idea that those videos showing him kind of confused and out of touch and having to be led away in a couple contexts, you know, were not just misleading or you needed to watch the full clips, but you know, she called them deep fakes. She said they were manipulated. You know, they were. There's been a concerted effort by Team Biden, helped by many in the press and in the mainstream media, to stigmatize questions about the mental acuity. Now that is so undeniable, and no one in the media is trying to deny it anymore. I think frankly, people in the mainstream media, people at CNN and MSNBC, feel a little like they've been caught flat-footed, like they were fed this narrative that they, in some cases, regurgitated, that is now, they're not trying to pretend that's still true. They know it, and I think they feel duped, or that they took part in this farce and are turning on Team Biden because of it.
Yeah, that's right. And now the White House is turning on those media outlets as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the sticking points for Democrats I spoke to is the fact that this is not a new development. It's something that has existed and voters have been able to see for a while. But there's been this cognitive dissonance around it. And now the message is, quite frankly, an almost Trump level of conspiratorial. They're saying, well, the media is working against Joe Biden. The pollsters are working against Joe Biden. The people who lit the debate were working against Joe Biden. And now any Democrat who expresses concern is working against Joe Biden. I mean, that may make the White House feel better, but it certainly isn't persuading skeptical Democrats that they fully understand just how concerning this is from an optics perspective.
Yeah, and that line of argument is just so clearly wrong. The concern is based on the fact, look, I believe that many Democrats absolutely want to beat Donald Trump, don't want him to be president again, and they are making the not at all unreasonable conclusion, in fact, a well-founded conclusion based on evidence and data, that Joe Biden will not defeat Donald Trump in November, that he already had a difficult path to doing so. He was slightly the underdog, or maybe it was about even at some point, and then it was slipping away from him, and because of that debate performance, it's now very far beyond him to do so, and they don't want that to happen, although there's some people like Jared Golden saying, it's just going to happen and we're going to deal with it. It's not too late to try something else, but you know, Biden himself has, I think, I guess he has the incentive to stay in it. He doesn't want to give it up. His family's telling him to keep going for it. The best time, obviously, to switch him out would have been just for him to not announce that he's not going to run for re-election a year and a half ago.
Absolutely.
And that would have been fine. And you know, the team behind him, or maybe it's the family who pushed him to this point, that is seeming like a very, very, very bad move for Democrats.
It is, and it puts Democrats in a bind because now they're essentially panicking about the wrong thing. The polls that have come out show that Biden's fallen about 2 points in the swing states. And you can ask Barack Obama, you can ask Donald Trump in 2016, being 2 points down in June is not indicative of anything. The bigger problem is now Biden is clearly losing the confidence of Democratic leaders.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger problem for him, because if he expects Democrats to come to the White House and engage him on his terms on this, he has misread the situation. He needs to show his vitality and understanding of the situation, not just to the American people in speeches, but now he needs to convince Nancy Pelosi, who's 84 and has some understanding of what it is to be an older person in politics. So it's very interesting she's suddenly speaking out here.
Yeah, although I also saw on her TV saying, you know who's the one who really has dementia? It's Donald Trump, which is a very quintessential Nancy Pelosi. Speaking of Trump, you know, I've noticed he's been eerily quiet during all this. This man can exercise self-discipline when he really needs to, and it's advantageous for him to do so. Obviously, I think he did a really good job during the debate. It wasn't just that Biden performed so badly; it's that Trump was impressive. He's impressively quiet now. I don't know. He read The Art of War or something, or Napoleon. You know, when your enemy is making a mistake, just let him. Shut up. Don't do anything about it. That's what's happening. And it actually reminds me of how Trump handled the Brett Kavanaugh accusations, where he was also very quiet and he just kind of let it play out and it went through. Which also, I should say, again, in the terms of Biden getting off the ticket, like I fully expected when Trump was running for president and the Access Hollywood tape broke, and every prominent Republicans, all the past Republican candidates, the leaders of the party, they all denounced Trump. Many of them said they wouldn't be voting for him. They wanted him to drop out. I mean, by then it was post-convention. It was so late. It would have been just resigning the election at that point. But they still called for him to do it. He stayed in the race, and then he won. So there is a precedent for extreme pressure to drop out on a candidate, just not working, and the candidate saying, you know what? Nope, you can't make me. No one can make him. No one can make him. That is the fundamental thing people watching have to understand. I always hear this. They are going to switch him out. They won't let him. There is no they. The they is Joe Biden and his family. If he has to take the crown off his head, set it on the seat, and ride off into the sunset. He has to willingly take that action, and maybe he can be convinced to do it, but it's not happening without his assent. And I'm not seeing evidence that he's being persuaded by the people he's listening to close to him that he should get off the ticket.
Well, I do want to push back on this sort of idea that Donald Trump was impressive at the debate. It's easy to seem impressive when you just lie. I mean, by some counts, 27 individual provable lies. I mean, that's not impressive. That's just running the kitchen sink against someone who can't effectively respond to you. But I agree that his silence is quite shocking. It reminds me of the scene in Happy Gilmore where Happy learns how to putt, and suddenly everyone doesn't know what to do. The fact that Donald Trump, I mean, can you imagine him remaining this quiet on this in 2016 had this happened? I can't. And that's a really worrying thing because it shows that he's starting to listen to advisors. And if that's what's going to happen here, it's going to be an even more challenging race.
The debate was reminiscent of Happy Gilmore in many ways.
Yes.
And they started, it was very Happy and Shooter McGavin
there was
started
a
talking
golf
about
discussion too.
whose golf swing is more impressive. Look, Trump, is a serial exaggerator of certain facts, and that definitely
We can just call them lies.
Came through at the debate on the extent of immigrant crime and a lot of other subjects. Biden was totally unable to rebut it given his state.
Yeah, and that's truly unfortunate because some of those lies were incredibly obvious, and core parts of Biden's campaign messaging is rebutting those lies. If he's not an effective messenger for that, maybe these Democrats have a point. I
mean, it's hard to be in the position of trying to say, we still have, this is the problem the incumbent always faces. Things have improved, we still have challenges. The challenger can say, well, here are all the things that are still wrong with the country. Even if some of them are exaggerations. Crime did spike after the pandemic, and it's thankfully come down in a lot of places, although it's stayed high. It's in Washington, D.C., it stayed extremely high. Washington, D.C. is the city under the federal government's thumb the most, and crime is worst here.
The city Donald Trump promised to clean up, and certainly hasn't been the case.
So Biden, with the economy, with inflation still being higher than a lot of Americans want, it's hard for the incumbent to say, well, I'm trying to tell you things are so much better now, but that's not the lived experience of so many people. So it's hard to acknowledge that people are suffering and that things could be better while still defending what you've done to improve things when you're not able to think as clearly as he was.
No, it's absolutely true.
All right, we will be back with certainly more discussion of this topic. We'll talk about the rise of Kamala Harris coming up. Stay tuned for more Rising.
I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
That was President Lyndon B. Johnson on March 31st, 1968, addressing the nation and saying that he would not be seeking a second term. Now, LBJ's decision is the subject of an op-ed penned by Northwestern professor Kevin Boyle, the op-ed "LBJ did it in 1968, Biden can do it too," makes the case for Biden to step away from the presidency just as LBJ did.
In his op-ed, Boyle says, quote, "More than anything else, LBJ was hoping that by ending his campaign, he could defuse an existential threat to the nation. The details may be different, but the situation Biden is facing is the same too." LBJ occupied the Oval Office from 1963 to 1969 during a time of national upheaval. There was the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, political assassinations, and riots in the streets. The United States was as politically divided then as it is today. Here to discuss further is author, New York Times columnist, and professor of history at Northwestern University, Kevin Boyle. Professor Boyle, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, the big question here is, historically, LBJ stepped down at the end of March. It's now July. That would make Joe Biden the latest candidate to ever step away from the presidential campaign. Is it simply too late for Joe Biden to do this without derailing the entire party?
There's enormous risks in him stepping down at this point. There's no doubt about that. But there is a convention that's coming up in Chicago, and that does give the party the opportunity to refocus on a different candidate.
So let's talk about what led to LBJ's decision to drop out. I believe he had lost a primary. He was deeply unpopular. There were protests every time he tried to speak anywhere in the country. Public frustration from all sides with what was happening in Vietnam was massive. He was, but what was the mechanism of it? Did the people around him come to him and say, "There is no way you will win if you either the nomination or the presidency"? What was the what actually motivated him to make that very difficult decision? Because as we've seen, our political leaders really like to stay in power and really like to seek additional power, even if it's a hard sell.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense inside the White House that he was a severely damaged candidate. There's no doubt about that. The White House understood that. Lyndon Johnson understood that. But people did not, in fact, come to him and say that he ought to withdraw from the campaign. His closest advisors didn't tell him that. That was a personal decision he came to in the face of a really profound set of crises that had culminated in about the 2 weeks before his withdrawal from the race at the end of March of 1968.
Now, I want to go back to what you mentioned a little bit earlier, because as you said, Democrats have a convention coming up. The big difference that I can see is in 1968, the party system was much stronger in the Democratic Party than it is in 2024. It's a very candidate-based system now. I mean, what challenges would the party as an entity have in even understanding how to operate a brokered convention after so long without one?
Yeah, there are multiple differences between the party in 1968 and the party today. The party today is essentially a party that had been constructed, especially in the presidential nominating process, because of 1968, because the party fractured in 1968, because there were multiple candidates running. There were 3 candidates, including Johnson, running before he withdrew from the race. Eugene McCarthy is an anti-war candidate, Bobby Kennedy is an anti-war candidate, and Johnson himself. So the party had factionalized in a serious way, but it was possible in 68 for a candidate to win the nomination of the party without actually running in primaries, which is what Hubert Humphrey in the end did. He didn't run in any primaries in 1968. And that fact led to the transformation of the party so that it's now a primary-driven system. So the challenge becomes structurally for the party, how does the party pick a new nominee, especially as you just mentioned, in this incredibly tight time frame? And then there's also the question of fundraising, which was in fact Hubert Humphrey's enormous problem as nominee as well. What happens to the process of collecting the vast amounts of money now that presidential candidates seek? So there's a whole set of intense practical problems to consider in this situation. The flip side, of course, is the danger that I think the nation faces by having a candidate who huge portions of the electorate see now as incapable of serving as president. That's the great danger on the flip side.
But there's no way, that has to be a decision that Biden himself makes, as LBJ himself made it back in 1968. And what we're hearing is that the people Biden listens to, those closest to him, his family, which includes his wife Jill Biden, and even Hunter Biden has emerged as a vocal proponent of his father continuing to run. Those people are still telling him to go for it. There's no mechanism to have him not be the candidate unless he assents to that.
Yeah, it absolutely has to be a decision that he and his family come to. And I suppose what I would hope is that as the family grapples with that decision, that what they start to think about isn't that his withdrawal is a terrible defeat. It's not that his withdrawal is a concession. It's an act of patriotism.
And there's also a look at how Lyndon Johnson actually did this. I mean, that announcement that he would not run again came as a shock even to some of his closest advisors. He kept that very close. Is there a way for Joe Biden to do this that doesn't send such a cataclysmic shockwave through Democratic circles?
I think that we're moving the party, and I think the nation is moving to the point that it wouldn't be a cataclysmic shockwave through the system. I think if he were to say today that he was dropping out of the race because he felt that he had done what he wanted to do and he did enormously important things in the course of his administration, and that he is simply at a point in his life. This is hard, man. I mean, it is really hard to acknowledge that point in your life. But that if he were willing to say to the American people, look, I have reached a point in my life where I don't feel that I can do this job effectively for the next 4 years, which is what we are talking about here in an election campaign. I don't think the shock through the system, there'd be enormous shock, there's no doubt about it, but I don't think that it would be enormous seismic shock the way it was with Lyndon Johnson, because people, as you just said, people didn't see that coming at all. Now people are primed for that to happen.
Yeah, I think something... now in American politics, it seems to me like it's become rarer for political figures to resign for any reason. For the kind of scandals that used to, your financial improprieties, even like legal message. I mean, Donald Trump's running for another term. Sex-based scandals, things that, when it happened to a representative or a governor or a state senator or something, or a candidate, they're like, okay, I'm done. Now, political figures just stick it out. It is as far as I can tell how things have changed in the last, even recently, maybe in the last 10 years. Now you just ignore it and you just move on, and eventually the news cycle moves on to something else. We have very elderly people at very senior levels of government. Dianne Feinstein just died in office. There was no question that she was incapable of doing her job for the last however many months or years while in office. It's become the norm for the political figures to just stick it out. I think that is what has changed since LBJ's day.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree with you more that this is such a different world. To even extend that farther, 30 years ago, candidates could be driven out of office or forced not to even run on scandals that today we can't even imagine stopping somebody from running. So yeah, I am absolutely with you on that. Maybe one way of thinking about that question, though, is that people have said over and over again, and I think it's a fair characterization, that Biden is an old-fashioned politician. Maybe this is the time to draw on that older tradition rather than the one we're in today.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Vice President Kamala Harris is the new talk of the town in Washington. Right now, she is the #1 alternative to replace President Joe Biden if he does choose to bow out of the 2024 presidential race, according to new polls. Now, 45% of registered voters would support Harris in a hypothetical matchup with former President Donald Trump. compared to just 43% of people backing Biden, according to CNN's new survey. So that still does show her losing to Trump, but faring better than Biden by 2 points. Now, that poll was conducted after the debate performance on Thursday, so it captures the public reaction to the debate. South Carolina Democratic Representative James Clyburn announced that he would hypothetically support Harris yesterday.
How would you feel if they worked around and tried to go around Kamala Harris because of her lack of high poll numbers and popularity and broadly based? Do you think it's hers to have if it is not his?
I will support her if he were to step aside. But I want to support her going forward at some time in the future.
Former Ohio Democratic Representative Tim Ryan called on President Biden to rip the Band-Aid off, writing on X, "Too much is at stake. The VP has significantly grown into her job. She will destroy Trump in a debate, highlight choice issues, energize our base, bring back young voters, and give us generational change. It's time." According to a White House official, former First Lady Michelle Obama is quietly talking about forming a coalition of wealthy black donors for Harris. Harris is beating Trump by 29 points among voters of color versus Biden, who leads that group by just 21 percentage points, according to CNN. Now, the media is also chiming in on this Kamala Harris moment. Newsweek headline from this morning reads, "Kamala Harris overtakes Joe Biden as the favorite to be a Democratic candidate." A Washington Post opinion article made the case yesterday. Kamala Harris is no riskier than Joe Biden.
Now, the online betting markets are abuzz with questions about who will be the actual Democratic nominee. And for now, Kamala Harris has taken the cake. According to Politico, Harris could run on the popular parts of Joe Biden's record without being held back by serious questions about age and mental fitness. She could also access the campaign fund's $240 million, whereas other candidates would have to start from scratch. But despite enjoying her best coverage since coming into the White House, Harris has not budged on her support for Biden. Here's what she had to say on Monday.
Many in your party have expressed concerns about President Biden's health. Just this morning, Congressman Doggett said that he's calling on President Biden to withdraw from the race, given that there's too much at stake to risk a Trump victory. What's your response to this?
Look, Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again, period.
Are you ready to lead the country if necessary?
I am proud to be Joe Biden's running mate.
Vice President Harris wrote on X yesterday, quote, "Democracy is on the ballot in November. Donald Trump vows to be a dictator on day one."
So here we are. That was some good news for Kamala Harris yesterday. So this poll conducted by CNN post-debate, reflecting the realities of the debate, had Biden at 43 percentage points, Kamala Harris at 45. It's 2 points. It's very key. That could be the difference between winning the election and losing the election in the swing states. They also polled a few of the other floated name potential alternatives, Buttigieg, Newsom, and Whitmer, who were, I believe, Buttigieg and Newsom were also at 43, and Whitmer was at 42. These figures are not nearly as nationally well known as Biden or Kamala Harris, so it's possible that if they were the nominee, they could go up or they could go down based on getting more news about their records. In particular, Gretchen Whitmer, who's always brought up as governor of Michigan, is really unknown on the national political stage. So this was a boon, a feather in the cap of Kamala Harris if people are going to make the argument that she would be a better alternative. For most of the Biden presidency, she polled worse than Biden. There was no reason for him to step aside when his most obvious successor was not as popular as he was. That calculus had started to change even before the debate. I had seen polls showing that she was now more popular than Biden. In the wake of the debate, it seems inarguable that she seems on paper to be a more formidable candidate than Joe Biden.
Yeah, and this has got to be a happy day for Kamala Harris in a sense, who's had some rough press in her time as vice president.
Yes, she has.
There's been a lot of conversations about how the Biden White House has sort of sidelined her, that there hasn't been great relations. And while I appreciate her commitment to fighting the general election fight against Donald Trump, there is certainly an element here that is engaged in talking to senior Democratic leaders about this, sounding out a possibility. If anyone for a minute believes Kamala Harris's team isn't strategizing on these conversations, you misunderstand both politics and Kamala Harris, because nobody gets to this point without a healthy dose of ambition and without a sense of strategy.
Oh, I
and right now,
100% agree
she
with
is certainly looking at how this goes. And Michelle Obama, I think, is also very shrewd in taking herself out. She was polled recently as a candidate, and putting it behind Harris adds a lot of support that Obama has recently sort of withdrawn from Joe Biden.
Yeah, the idea that it was going to be Michelle Obama, that's just like, that's fan fiction.
Yeah.
Michelle Obama does not want to run for president. She's a millionaire. She's living her best life.
Yep.
You know, she can give speeches and make millions. She writes books. She's going on vacation. You know, she does not want to be, being in politics is like running is hard. She's a pretty well-liked figure. Your favorability goes down immediately when you start getting involved in the partisan political arena. That's not something that appeals to just everyone. She already has a lot of wealth and authority and is doing the things she wants. So that was always going to be some kind of fantasy. I 100% agree with Kamala Harris wants to be president. She absolutely wants to be president. And she has a chance that she will be president at some point. In recent history, most vice presidents have gone on to seek the presidency in their own right, and a fair number of them have been elected. Joe Biden is himself a former vice president. George H.W. Bush was a former vice president. Al Gore sought the presidency. Them seeking the presidency is the norm, and them getting that at a decent number of the time is also a norm. So she is paying attention in this moment. Of course, she's saying what she's saying on TV. For her to, she has no incentive to be appearing to be sabotaging or turning on Biden. She will stick by him up until the point where he's out, and then it will be hers. But the idea that she would be passed over at this point is, I think, very unlikely. If he were to step aside. Of course, you know, previously there's, again, people like Newsom or Mayor Pete, or some of the cast of characters who ran last time have been suggested as alternatives, because she is not so overwhelmingly popular in her own right, and she has gotten so much bad press. But passing her over was always going to be nasty business. Not, I think, because she actually has this really deep reservoir of robust, genuine grassroots support in a way that, for instance, like Bernie Sanders actually has. But because I think her allies in the media would make the idea of a black woman, the first potential black female president, getting passed over would create a terrible news cycle. I don't think it would matter so much for the actual base of Democratic voters. I don't think they're clamoring for Kamala Harris or else. But it would be a really bad news cycle.
Yeah, and this is, at the end of the day, politics. There are demographic realities here, and Kamala Harris comes in with some strengths. I mean, Democrats are trying to engage a black vote that has softened on Joe Biden fairly considerably over the last 4 years. And that's just an inconvenient reality for the party. That's not news to anyone who's managing this campaign. And the fact is, if Biden can't manage this situation and Harris's numbers keep going up, you're going to see things very quickly go from "we did it, Joe" to "we're done, Joe." And the reality, the irony is, Joe Biden's attempts to keep Kamala Harris at arm's length will end up helping her, because she can easily then say, listen, I didn't know. It was kept from me as much as anyone else. And I have essentially offer a clean slate here for Democrats to run these popular policies without the challenge of having to constantly ask if the presidential candidate knows where they are.
Yeah. For a long time, it was not even the case that she was necessarily more popular, as far as I could tell, with black voters than Joe Biden was. Obviously she is black, but that doesn't, pure identity-based arguments are often turned to. But we did just read a poll showing her doing better with black voters than Joe Biden by a substantial degree. I mean, it really just reflects the fact that Joe Biden is losing a lot of people's faith right now. And she is, if there is to be an alternative, which I am still somewhat skeptical of. Don't mistake me. It's a possibility. It could happen. I'm not saying there's no chance of it happening, but like everyone in my life right now is saying it's just a matter of time. He's going to drop out tomorrow. He's going to drop out over the weekend. I absolutely think that could happen, but it's not just he has to agree to do that, and he's still hearing stick it out from the people he listens to. Now, I did just see reported by someone from Bloomberg on a lot is happening today at once. So I can't find it at the moment, that he has told a top ally that he is, well, it is in the New York Times. He's told a top ally he's weighing whether to continue in the race right now. So that's some reporting.
I mean, that says really all you need. There's no reason for the Biden administration to telegraph that information unless that's a decision that's fairly well along. I mean, it telegraphs weakness in a way that you would not want. And now that we're seeing, Michelle Obama start to come out very publicly for a clear successor, Barack Obama starting to add some questions into this, and now the Harris team is making the money argument. And that's going to be the argument that moves the donors, because these people do not want to go out and raise $250 million again. It's just not there. So this gives Kamala Harris a clear glide path in. Whether she can actually do it once she's at the top of the ticket, that's a very different beast than being the second in command.
So you think this is going to happen?
I think that if you're hearing the White House speaking, even off the record, that he's even considering it after a week almost of saying that he absolutely would not and he intends fully to debate in September, I mean, you can read between some pretty big lines there.
Well, we will be paying close attention to each and every development in this news day. More rising right after this. Breaking news, President Joe Biden has told a key ally that he's weighing whether to continue in the race, the New York Times has reported. According to the Times, Biden knows that salvaging his candidacy, that's the quote, may be impossible after his disastrous debate performance last week. Now, a White House spokesperson did deny that report, saying it's absolutely false. In any case, White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients is holding an all-staff call this afternoon as business leaders, pundits, and even now some Democratic officials are calling on Biden to step aside. Meanwhile, Team Biden has offered up this excuse for his weak debate performance: jet lag. At a donor event in McLean, Virginia on Tuesday evening, he said, quote, "I decided to travel around the world a couple of times, I don't know how many time zones. Shortly before the debate, I almost fell asleep on stage. By debate night, Biden had been back just shy of 2 weeks from his travels." Now, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre blamed his health when grilled by the press. Let's watch.
What I can tell you is that he had a cold and a bad night. I would not see this as an episode. I would see this as what it was and what we believe it to be, which is it was a bad night.
Biden's dismal debate night is now showing up in the polls. One poll by Our Revolution showed 67% of progressive voters want Biden to bow out. Of the 17,000 progressive voters surveyed, 15% of progressives say that they are unlikely or very unlikely to vote for Biden if he remains the nominee. Meanwhile, Biden's turning to his grandkids for some public support, at least according to a story dropped in the New York Times over the weekend. According to the Times, young Biden family members are trying to save his campaign after it took a nosedive in last week's debate. And among their ideas is that the president should increase his presence on social media, including, get this, jumping on the 2020 TikTok dance challenge of Megan Thee Stallion's single Savage.
That'll do it. Critics say propping Joe up in front of a phone to cut it up for TikTok dances, that's not a good idea. Luke Winkie of Slate writes that his grandkids won't save him, and that if true, this strategy is evident of a campaign that's run out of ideas. The deeper fundamental issue for the Biden camp is their, quote, candidate who is 81 and can't interface with another human being without the help of a teleprompter. It's unsolvable. Yeah, so this is I mentioned it just briefly in our previous segment, but the New York Times is now reporting that Biden has told an ally he's weighing options. Now, that was the headline, weighing whether to continue in the race. I will say the first couple paragraphs are a little bit gentler than that. This ally emphasized he's still deeply in the fight for re-election and understands that his next few appearances have to go well for him, which includes a George Stephanopoulos interview on Friday that's going to be pre-taped, which is an interesting choice. And then the White House says, no, he's not weighing whether to drop out. He's staying in.
Well, I'll tell you, if your allies are saying this, you need better allies, because there is, quite frankly, zero to be gained from planting any of this in the media or in voters' minds. You don't telegraph that you're considering stepping down from the presidency as a way to showcase your commitment and strength to the job. It's just going to raise more questions, as will this taped Stephanopoulos interview. And listen, George Stephanopoulos is a good interviewer. I expect him to not throw softball questions Biden's way. But
you think so?
I do. But the fact that it isn't live is just going to raise even more questions.
Yeah.
And that's a genuine question. The president's ability to think on his feet is critical to this job. And if you're only going to do 5 to 10 minute speeches, pre-tapes. That's just not how the world works.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that he can read off a teleprompter, that he can answer questions that are not hostile whatsoever. So I hope George Stephanopoulos really grills him, makes him think on his feet, because that's what he showed that he has trouble doing during the debate. In terms of the travel schedule, the jet lag, well, the plane flights were days before that. And I mean, even if they weren't, I get that it's an exhausting job. That is true. Mm-hmm. Being president is exhausting. Being Secretary of State is exhausting. There's a lot of travel to foreign countries, across our country. It takes a lot to travel from one side of our country to the other. It is a demanding job. The sleep schedule is rough, but that's why we have questions about whether it's a good job for an 81-year-old man who's showing his age. So I don't see what advantage that excuse really buys them. And then if he was sick, and he did sound kind of hoarse and whispering, he was hard to understand. He was harder to understand than he's ever been during that debate. I believe, I'm not unwilling to believe that he had a cold. It was just a very bad tactical error to allow the debate to go forward if he was not well. Maybe they would have taken a hit if they delayed the debate, but that would have been better than the hit they're taking for having him perform that debate without an ability to speak. He was hard to hear. He was mumbling. He was whispering, way worse than he is usual. In all fairness,
yeah, it was challenging.
I accept that he was ill.
It was very challenging to watch. I mean, maybe he should put on bronzer. The main beneficiary of this has been Donald Trump, who is not the sharpest guy himself. I mean, by his own records, started his White House day about 10 in the morning, ended around 4 or 5, fell asleep during his New York criminal trial multiple times, has confused the names of his own cabinet secretaries. But as we have talked about previously, he doesn't show the same visible halting signs of this.
Yeah.
So in many ways, the perception that he can speak at a rapid pace, that he can speak at a high volume, is given voters a sense of confidence in his ability. And that is potentially, very likely, not earned. But that's a tough thing for Joe Biden to spin, because you're not going to suddenly become a much healthier, much more empowered speaker, especially after facing all of this.
Yeah, it's a bad situation. There's no way around it. I know we're talking about it a lot today. You know, this is what everyone in political news is speculating about. You know, we're going into a holiday weekend. Tomorrow's the 4th of July. Friday is not really a holiday, but a lot of people are probably going to treat it as such, as it's in between the 4th and the weekend. I think a lot of soul searching is going to go on this weekend among Biden and his family. And I know there are a lot of people, I lot of people I know in political media who are expecting a decision to drop out sometime over the weekend, imminently. I don't know. I think he might just hold on, because that's what it is common for political figures to do, as we talked about in our interview earlier in the show today with a professor who wrote about the parallels to 1968, which is the last time you had a political figure who was eligible to be the sitting president, eligible to run for re-election, deciding not to, even after taking a foray into the electoral season. Of course, LBJ was in a very different circumstance, because he had lost an early primary, and he hadn't actually won Biden has won the nomination. And also, we just live in very different political times, where political figures, even ones racked by massive scandals, don't just go away quietly. Donald Trump is in that situation. He's not going away quietly either. He has had multiple scandals. He lost his re-election, and he's facing criminal charges in a variety of jurisdictions, and he's still seeking office. So, square that with whatever Biden's calculus is right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've learned that powerful people don't like to give up that power. They always think they're up for the job. What baffles me is whoever planted this story in the New York Times about his grandkids should be fired. Did Joe Biden want TikTok to be banned? Isn't this a strange
He does want to ban
contradiction
TikTok.
here?
Yeah, he's the banned TikTok candidate, oddly enough, even though Trump, it originated
and then
under
changed his
Trump.
mind once he got some money from donors who want it to be kept open. This is what happens when your grandkids are advising your campaign. You can't expect them to understand the nuances of social media policy.
Grandkids, except the one that Hunter has with the out-of-wedlock girl who I believe Joe
That's a whole
Biden
different
has
story.
not met that grandkid, and that grandkid has just like not been included in the whle kind of Biden family in a way that seems kind of cruel and unnecessary. But
And they may have some great ideas.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Can he floss his way to re-election? That's that one move.
After watching Joe Biden, and I hate to say it, but after watching him walk to the debate podium, I'm not sure dancing is really what we should be having him do if we want him to look vital.
No, that was the smartest thing he did during the kind of African dancing that was going on Juneteenth, and he's just standing rigidly silent.
Yeah.
Didn't fault him for that at all. I would have been standing rigidly in place during such things as well.
So he can acknowledge his limits sometimes.
Yeah. But Donald Trump does that, the kind
that's
of dance
almost
move.
even worse. The hotline playing SNL clip is burned into my memory.
I think it's beautiful to watch, and there's going to be more opportunities for that great content when he is reelected president, when Donald Trump is. Okay, we are continuing to monitor all of these breaking news developments. Stay tuned for more Rising right after this. Sometimes there is no need for words, and this is one of those times. Check out this new video from the anti-Trump group, The Lincoln Project, about Steve Bannon's trip to prison.
Hey, Steve. A wise man once said, kick someone's the first day or become someone's Of course, you may run into some problems on both of those fronts. First of all, you look about as intimidating as a butterfly fart, so kicking anyone's ass will probably result in becoming someone's anyway. Of course, then comes the problem that you've clearly let yourself go for, well, I guess you've always looked that way, haven't you? Either way, you should probably explore some more options. We humbly recommend you check out the skinheads. They're organized, their haircuts are easy, and there's a really solid chance you all agree on just about everything. And look, we all get it. This is a big interruption in the election season, and you're barely gonna have time to plan your next coup. But try to take some time to reflect on things, okay? We'll be here waiting when you get out.
The Lincoln Project PAC posted that video yesterday, a day after Trump's former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon had to report to prison. Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress after he was found guilty of defying a subpoena from the House committee investigating the January 6th attacks. A truly despicable video, in my view, and in the views of, I'm not alone in thinking this, that was generally the reaction on social media. I don't know why they think it's funny to make light of the reality of prison sexual abuse. Just atrocious video.
Yeah, I mean, who can forget the famous time Abraham Lincoln hoped his opponents got sexually assaulted in jail?
Jesus.
I mean, who is this ad for, is my question. And I'll expand that out to who is the Lincoln Project for? I mean, they raised tens of millions of dollars arguing that they were going to flip college-educated Republicans, independents, and Trump skeptics. The data doesn't bear that out. Trump consolidated Republicans in 2020, even though he lost. And they spent a bunch of money in my town of New York putting an ad against Donald Trump on a billboard in Times Square. Not exactly the most competitive district in America. I mean, this is largely stuff that's being used to take Democrats and progressives' money and then play it back to them.
Absolutely. It's absolutely that. And I can't believe, honestly, that they're still taken seriously on cable news. You know, they're Steve Schmidt, what are the other guys' names? Rick Wilson, George Conway. Those people are still regular figures on with Joyanne Reid on MSNBC and in other places. You know, so these are Republican operatives. Steve Schmidt was the head of the McCain campaign. Yeah, he's been denounced by Meghan McCain and everyone else, formerly affiliated with that campaign. These are people who hate Donald Trump, and they're trying to say that, well, we're arguing why Republicans should turn on Donald Trump, but they're exclusively just providing kind of resistance pornography to the liberal viewers of MSNBC. They have no credibility on what Republicans want and think. They have no, as you've pointed out, no track record of success of turning people against Trump. They also don't confine their efforts to Trump. They did this whole fake event against Glenn Youngkin, who is not you think whatever you want about him, but is not a Trumpist kind of Republican.
Yeah.
And they were they did some tiki torch stunt to try to tie him to white nationalists, where they were doing like basically a kind of false flag thing, where they tried to make it seem like white nationalists were flocking to Youngkin. Not even to Trump, to Youngkin.
Which arguably cost Terry McAuliffe critical votes in that race. I mean, voters blamed him for that.
Yeah, there's some real scumballs, and this is another example of that, just vile stuff.
It's such a great example of this sort of resistance grift that picked up that is still sort of in a zombie form, which is that this is not a PAC or any kind of political advocacy group. The Lincoln Project is a media company. They produce television podcasts, they produce newsletters that reach out to the faithful, the already converted, and persuade them that everything they believe is correct. And that it pushes, at this point, very open conspiracy theories about Steve Bannon and Donald Trump. As you know, I am no fan of Steve Bannon.
Neither am I.
But some of this is excessive to the point that it actually diminishes the real horrific things this man believes.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to call out grifting on both sides. This absolutely happens in Republican fundraising circles as well. The whole, the zombie, stop the steal kind of everything. Elder Republican people are still sending money to crank right-wing figures, promising that the election is still being looked into, or election accountability, or give money to this to make sure we're getting all those votes counted. That it's an utter scam, and people are being having that money taken for totally false pretenses. I called out several times campaign fundraisers that the Trump people would do in the midterm cycle, where they'd say, give to it's like matching. It's like give money to a specific Republican Senate candidate, and then you actually check down it's all going to some kind of Trump thing. I've seen right-wing figures. I've gotten emails from them that were like, I'm there defending and protecting Donald Trump. Help donate to this effort. It's not to any effort. It's just to their own personal coffer. So it absolutely happens on the right, but this is a good example of it happening in liberal and progressive circles as well. Taking money from people, saying there's some strategy, making these highly produced, ridiculous, distasteful, disgusting videos that just preach to the choir, that don't bring anyone new in. And they should stop being listened to, and it's really appalling. I mean, one of their other this organization again was founded by Rick Wilson, Steve Schmidt, George Conway, and John Weaver, who is a political figure who was accused of harassment, of underage individuals, of kind of quid pro quo being made to young men. He's been denounced by the organization, is no longer part of it. If this is your cast of characters running this place, people who thought that was a good idea and who once had John Weaver in their midst, maybe you should just cease and desist.
And you forget, amid all of this, also paying themselves quite handsomely for this, funneling this money often to consulting companies and production companies in which they either are partners or that they own outright. I mean, this is, to me, one of the biggest reasons why a record number of voters have checked out of the process and say that they're just disgusted with it, is because you see this, as much as politics has opposed this Trump MAGA grifting scam, they've realized that it's actually very profitable. And we've started to see these similar bones of these scams pop up on the left as well. And it is demoralizing, and it is very disengaging to see people give away money that, frankly, a lot of them cannot afford to give because they're being scared into it. And then the result is an ad that's going to play on Twitter for a weekend, that's going to be viewed by 98% Democratic voters who have already made up their mind.
And it's funny that they act like they don't want Donald Trump to be president again. It would be the best thing for them, financially speaking. They would be raking in the money if he does actually win the presidency again, as he currently looks a little bit likely to do. But still a lot of news to come. More Rising right after this. A lot of people are wondering how they allowed Biden to get this far. It's the question on some Democrats' minds this week, with many blaming the White House press corps. Jill Abramson, the former executive editor of the New York Times, wrote in Semaphore, quote, "It's clear the best news reporters in Washington have failed in the first duty of journalism, to hold power accountable. It's our duty to poke through White House smokescreens, find out the truth. The Biden White House clearly succeeded in a massive cover-up of the degree of the president's feebleness and his serious physical decline, which may be simply the result of old age. Shame on the White House press corps for not having pierced the veil of secrecy surrounding the president. Glenn Greenwald added that CNN is coming to a similar conclusion. In an article, CNN quotes a reporter who says the White House press shop has also been very aggressive and fairly successful in mitigating coverage of concerns over the president's age. The reporter essentially says the press corps knew how much age stories angered the White House and the liberal Twitter sphere.
CNN's Jake Tapper also blaming top Democratic officials for trying to convince the public that Joe Biden's in great shape. Take a look.
There is a pattern, discernible pattern of Democratic officials seemingly trying to convince you, the public, to not believe what you saw and what you heard with your eyes and with your ears on Thursday night.
Yeah, there's no way around it. A lot of people are asking why it wasn't made more evident to the American people that the decline has become so bad. Of course, there are a number of possible explanations, one being that the press themselves were shielded from it. Obviously, they've done those press conferences, a couple of them where they've asked some confrontational questions, and he's totally trailed off. There was one specifically about Israel where he forgot who was in negotiations, and someone in one of the press reporters had to say, Hamas, you mean Hamas. There have been moments like that. Really, I think it was mainly not so much the press corps, although I see that argument. To me, it was more, it's the White House itself constantly and aggressively engaged on spin on behalf of Biden and denying that there's anything wrong with him and attacking journalists, some conservative journalists, but also mainstream journalists for pretending otherwise. And then the talking heads on cable news who are very much, not officially part of the White House, but are in the Biden camp, who tried to cover up the age-related questions.
Yeah, I think that's broadly right. There's a misconception about the press corps that I think is in people who are lucky enough to not have to do this for a living, which is that they think the press corps has total access to the president, that they can wander into the Oval Office and ask him questions, when in fact the reporting that we've seen come out is of a president who's very closely guarded by top advisors, who even junior level advisors have trouble getting directly to without extensive scheduling appointments, without being very closely checked, and meetings are generally kept very short. Joe Biden is not the kind of president who's hanging out in the press room jawing with people like Bill Clinton did for hours at a time.
Yeah.
He is a very distant figure. But at the same time, we also know that the press corps is an access-based organization, that they're going to prize access over telling a really tough story that may result in them not getting a scoop or being left out of the next big story. And that's a real conflict that I think the press corps itself struggles to resolve.
Where I think the press went most wrong with respect to the Biden mental decline question is in not realizing earlier that this was a top concern of Americans and having their reporting reflect the seriousness of that question. Polling has shown for a very long time now that a majority of Democrats had serious doubts about Biden's ability to run for re-election.
Yep.
Even if they support him and want him to be president, they have these serious doubts. And that has been the reality for a long time. And there have not, most of the reporting on Biden's age or he's too old has come from adversarial conservative news sources. I think a lot of people in Washington, liberal media figures, mainstream media figures, were about, this is all about the issues, which it is about the issues. Don't get me wrong. Inflation, immigration, foreign policy, other things. Issues do matter. These two figures are very well known. I don't think it's really a clash of personalities. I think it is about the issues. It's about the issues and the reality of Biden's fitness for the office given his advanced age. That has come through in the polling so clearly. I think it's not been a focus of the press corps. You're right, though, that it's an access-based thing, and they've not had a lot of access to him. But I think a lot of people writing about Biden and writing about the White House have not sufficiently, until now, foregrounded that question, understanding that it's top of the American people's mind. When you go outside D.C., you go, visit other parts of the country, you talk to family and friends who are, keyed into politics, not professionally the way we are, but are paying attention, regardless if they're pro-Trump or pro-Biden. The age thing comes up in conversation with them immediately. And I think that's what was being missed.
Yeah, this is not a new issue. It's rather the D.C. press realizing an issue that has been there for a while and finally discussing it. I think in the same way that Donald Trump is sort of helped by people like Project Lincoln, who dial it up to 11 on the extreme rhetoric, Joe Biden's been really helped by places like Newsmax and Fox News that constantly say he has dementia, that he can't walk, that he's being puppeted by people. And it makes it easier to say, well, there's no way that this extreme situation can be true. And it allows you to say, well, it's Fox News, let's get serious. But the reality now is that, these people, and especially in the press corps, have to answer questions about why they weren't taking those questions more seriously and why they weren't, quite frankly, as loud about being denied access to Joe Biden as they were when they were denied access to Trump, when they were denied access to Obama. That's a very different tone for the press corps to strike.
Yeah, I mean, I want a time frame. I want to know if he's fit for the presidency right now. I want to know how bad is the decline day to day. If it's true that he has more good days than bad, great. I want to see him on some of those good days so we can do that, so we can count ourselves to know that this is not just a steady progression into, the path that we all will take someday into mental decline and an elderly situation, at which point you shouldn't be working, or at least you shouldn't be in, let alone the toughest job on planet Earth.
Yeah. It's not exactly a winning strategy from Biden's perspective either to say, listen, you guys can count the days I'm healthy and see if inside you it makes sense to reelect me. Woof.
Yeah, on some level, if you wouldn't trust this person to manage your local hardware store because of their age-related decline, how could they possibly be fit to be president of the United States? And again, we're deciding whether we're signing him up for 4 more years of this. That's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long time. So the press definitely has to reckon with how it's come to this, how it's all breaking out now. A moment no one could spin or deny, where it was seen for the entire American people on television, and we've gotten to this place, and there will be a reckoning on how it got to that. Well, I know that was a lot of Biden news today on Rising, but a lot of things are happening in Washington. Lots of updates to bring you on whether President Joe Biden will indeed stay in the race for the presidency. This does it for us today. Thank you so much, Max, for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we will have a slew of captivating content posted for you on the 4th of July, which is a holiday tomorrow. And then, of course, Amber Duke, Jessica Burbank will be back for the regular installment of Rising Fridays. And then I will be back with you on Monday. See you then.